Well, welcome again back to the Valley of St. Louis Master Craftsman Study Group as we hold our second virtual lecture for Master Craftsman Symbolic Lodge. So, you guys have had a great opportunity to dig into the first section on the early history of Freemasonry, its early development, the Gothic constitutions, things like that. Now, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the nitty gritty of early ritual. And the first two sections, or this section and the section after, the first two kind of deep sections, are going to break apart those pieces of ritual. So you're going to be reading some exposés, things like that. It is very important that you read that material, get a good grip of it. Neither of those exposés in either case are very long, and they're very interesting, and you'll find some really cool similarities. So I cannot stress, please read that material. We are going to have a great time going through this, and I look forward to hearing some of your observations. All right, so let's dig in to this material. Let's make a good cut of it. Again, please ensure this lecture is reviewed prior to reading, is complete, and all that good jazz. You want to do the readings and listen to this. You can kind of read it in tandem, but I think it would do much better for you to read the material, listen to this, and then join us for our in-person meeting. So again, we're excited to kick things off here as we dig deeper into Symbolic Lodge. We approach the early Masonic rituals, and this is part one. It is a two-part sequence. So we're going to dig through two different exposés in this section, and then one in part two, the second section, which will be our later down the road next evolution. So first off, a couple things that are really important to note is we're reading these exposés specifically because they are referenced by Pike. Pike himself mentions these sources in other places. They were available on his bookshelves. We have a full list of all the texts Pike owned. We know that these were there available to him for research and development of ideas, and he references them in various other places. So we're going to look at their evolution, their development, and we're going to consider their innovation. The biggest lie in Freemasonry is there will be no innovation in the body of Masonry. Biggest lie there is, and it's the biggest cop-out to stopping change, yet it is also the most true thing there is. If there were no innovation, Masonry would be quite different. And while differing with these specific exposés, they're going to differ from the Preston Webb work that we know. They do shine light on how Pike came to his conclusions, where his research led him to, and they are in some ways the evolution of our own ritual, our own basis work. So you're going to find them very interesting. You're going to find them engaging. Specifically, for our considerations, we're going to look at a Mason's examination, the grand mysteries of Freemasonry discovered, and Masonry dissected. Those are the exposés we're going to approach this evening. And these date from about 1723 to 1730, a Mason's exam being the oldest at 1723. A couple years later in 1725 is a Grand Mysteries of Freemasonry discovered. And the Masonry dissected is in 1730. Masonry dissected, of course, is unique because, and we mentioned this in our early Freemasonry section, but we didn't call it directly out. Masonry dissected is the first appearance of the Master Mason's degree. It is that first appearance of that ritual in writing. Out of these three exposures, though, the first differs from the others in that the author seems to be speaking for the fraternity. The other two seem to be witnesses against the fraternity and their members. So it's kind of differing views, yet same points, leading through to similar explanations. So a Masonry's examination dates to 1723. In brief overview, it was originally untitled. It gets its title really from later publishing. It was reprinted in Gould's History of Freemasonry. And at first and that's really where it got its name. But it first appears in print itself, and over several days. It was a serial, so they printed a portion of it, then a little more, then a little more, in a paper called the Flying Post. And that was in April of 1723. Like many early exposés of the time, it was a catechism, so it wasn't specifically outlined word for word, detail for detail. It was back and forth, question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. And it was said that it was sourced from papers that belonged to a deceased brother. So a brother who passed away was the source of this paperwork. Interestingly enough about it, there are a couple other big key points. It alludes to a second degree, although it doesn't specifically touch on one. It talks of the mark of a master mason. Now, any brother who's been through the Master Mason's degree knows we don't specifically talk of a mark. There is the Mark Mason or the Mark Master degree in the York Rite of Freemasonry, which does have a mark. So that's kind of an interesting thing. And it also discusses the pattern of an arch, another topic tied to the York Rite, as we know it in the United States, or the Royal Arch of Freemasonry. So two details in there tied more to other Masonic degrees and bodies that evolved over time. And of course, the allusion to the second degree, where it doesn't really hit on the second degree in this expose, just the first. We do learn a couple quick things as it walks us through the ritual. We're told that it is the only society that has observed and kept the pillars of good fellowship, taciturnity, and concord, and has only one instance where a Mason betrayed that. So it talks about how this is a fraternity of good fellowship, concord, harmony, peace, upstanding nature, except one time. And the one time it refers to, it talks with the original Judas who destroyed a temple. And that references Samson and talks about how he from the Bible and how he was punished accordingly. Further, it tells us that Masons are industrious. They're not plotters, perjurers, or conspirators. Again, going back to the idea that this was one of the exposés written in favor of the fraternity, speaking positively about the fraternity. So it really reiterates this idea of peace, harmony, loyalty to the country, to the crown, not conspiracy, plotting, treason, anything like that. In terms of a degree, we find some simple instruction relating to an apprentice. We find some things that we'll find familiar. And as I go through these exposés, I didn't really touch on it in our first meeting, but it is important to note. I will be speaking from the lens of the exposé. At times, you may feel this is similar to our ritual. But anything we put in text here in the slides or we discuss verbally under recording, as long as it can be found within the text of our work, Esoterica, or publicly available through Duncan's Monitor or any other large-scale publicly printed monitor, we'll reference it in that light. You can take your own personal understandings and our Missouri perspectives, and we can discuss those in detail at the in-person meeting. So, the entered apprentice degree. We're told that upon being entered, the apprentice, and by entered, it's into the ledgers of the lodge, receiving a petition, and then being brought forth. The apprentice presents a pair of women's gloves and men's gloves and a leather apron. He is obligated. He's then blindfolded. He's unblindfolded, and he beholds 1,000 different postures and grimaces, different faces, of which he must then irritate. So I very much think of it as a guy just hopping around and having to contort his body. Later, he is then brought forth into a circle, if you will, and it's whispered from man to man, youngest Mason, and so on. This word, this Mason's word, and notice this isn't the entered apprentice degree, going from the youngest Mason on until it reaches the master. And he's given this word and he passes it on. In the catechism of the degree, during his instruction back and forth, he actually repeats this statement. And I think it's a very interesting statement. I would consider you find it worthy to take a little bit of time to think on it, and definitely make sure you are reading these exposés thoroughly. The Entered Apprentice says, "An entered apprentice I have seen, Boaz and Jachin I have seen, a fellow I was sworn most rare, and know the Astler, diamond and square. I know the master's part for well, as honest Mahaben. Will you tell?" Now, I want you to pay attention to that last sentence, Mahaben or Machben. That word is going to come back to us several other times. It does have some important significance. And the reply to this statement by the Entered Apprentice is, "Observe you well the rule of three. Thy mark and Mahaben will set you free." Interesting statement. Again, drawing your attention to the rule of three. We see threes prolifically within the Masonic fraternity, within the lodge, whether we're talking about the three principal officers, three lights, greater, lesser, movable, immovable jewels, 3 degrees, etc., etc. Again, Mahaben, draw your attention to that. We do hear a couple other interesting things in the degree that you will perhaps find interesting in your own considerations. We are instructed in the points of entrance. The first is to hear and conceal. And I'd like you to take some time today or in the next day or so, think about those points of entrance. Think about the points of entrance that it lays out in a Mason's exam, and then think about the points of entrance that you know from your degree work as an entered apprentice. If you have questions about what those are, I would suggest you turn to your Missouri manual, your cipher, or a knowledgeable brother. But you should know those. Those are actually one of the ways you identify yourself as a Mason, is the perfect points of entrance. Now, what is interesting and not so familiar to us is they ask, "What lodge are you from?" And he says, "The Lodge of St. Stephen's." Of course, the degree ends. Again, this ritual does not have a Master Mason degree, does not have a Fellowcraft degree, just an entered apprentice. But it ends talking about the points of fellowship, which are foot to foot, knee to knee, hand to hand, ear to ear, tongue to tongue, and heart to heart. How does that differ from our work today? Consider that for a minute. Some slight differences, some interesting differences. There's also some discussion of a key. I find this intriguing. What is the key? Where is it kept? We're told it's kept in an ivory box. But do you actually know what the key is, what they're talking about, what the ivory box is? When they talk about an ivory box or a bone box that opens with ivory keys, they're talking about the skull, ivory keys being your teeth. It's quite an interesting symbol. It's used in various other rituals, both in the Scottish Rite and other areas where they discuss the bone box, the ivory keys, things like that. And then, of course, this ritual also tells us there are several ways to identify brothers. If you're in a space, you maybe need the assistance of a brother. Perhaps you want to share a drink with a brother at a tavern, or a coffee house, or something else. There are several ways you can identify a brother. You can cough 3 times. You can knock against something 3 times. Both of those to me seem potentially very simplistic, and people just may be confused what you're doing. If you're in the dark and there's a Mason, you can say the statement, "There is no darkness without the absence of light." And then the brother would reply, "There is no light without the absence of darkness." That's kind of interesting in itself. I think it would not work well if you're just down a random dark room and you just say that out. People are going to be very confused. It's also brought up that there are other ways to complement brothers within the fraternity if they meet in private or public, to show your necessity, as well as the signs and actions to do. So to leave your horse if you were somewhere and you needed to leave it safely. So all of those are options and opportunities to us as we follow the lessons of the Mason's examination, and we consider what's going on with that. The Next expose we're going to discuss is the Grand Mysteries of Freemasons Discovered from 1725. So hopefully you've read that, dug a little bit in. If you haven't, pause, take a few minutes, stop this recording, and go listen to it, or excuse me, go read it before you listen any further. The Grand Mysteries of Freemasonry Discovered dates to 1725, but it was actually first published, generally speaking, in 1724, we know, from a few other excerpts. And it was, of course, also reprinted, just like a Mason's Examination, by Gould. This one, similar type story in its origin, based on a Mason who died suddenly this time. This one is said, of course, in theory to be against the fraternity, and have some negative commentary interlaced. Brethren are said to be from this lodge of St. John, which stands perfect east and west, as all temples do. There are, of course, similar remarks as with the other degree, about an ivory box and a key. And we're told that the lodge is lit by 3 lights placed in the right east, the west, and the south, wherein they represent the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. It would be good now probably to do a short digression and note that Freemasonry, in its earliest versions, while open in various ways to men of all faiths, did have a heavy Christian tinge to it, for a very, very extended period. In early Freemasonry, exceptionally well noted. And up until, I believe, 1813, with the Duke of Sussex, who was then Grand Master, had those direct references purged out and adjusted to make the fraternity as open as it was intended to be. So occasionally we will see references to things that have much more of a Christian tinge than we would expect. There are also some particular points that are discussed in the Freemasons Discovered manuscript, specifically referencing that number 3. We see fraternity, fidelity, and taciturnity, which we're told represent brotherly love, relief, and truth, to which all Masons were ordained at the building of the Tower of Babylon and at the Temple of Jerusalem. We're also given 5 proper points, which are the foot to foot, knee to knee, hand to hand, heart to heart, and ear to ear. In this case, as the arch was mentioned in a Freemason's examination, in the Grand Mysteries of Freemasonry Discovered, the arch is also mentioned, but unlike the examination, it is actually associated directly, in this case, with architecture. The candidate, of course, does take upon himself an obligation, and he is told that he must serve God according to the best of his knowledge and institution, to be the true liegeman to the king, to help and assist any brother as far as his ability will allow, and by the contents of the sacred writ, he will perform that obligation. So help him God. Now, what is interesting to me about this exam specifically is that it does list 9 signs or means by which you, as a Mason, can know another brother. And how great is that? Giving us more tools to find Freemasons when we're out and about. The first, of course, is to take your hat off with 2 fingers and your thumb. I feel like that's a very almost natural move, but that's, if your eyes are keen enough, 2 fingers and a thumb, that's the right way to do it. To strike with the right hand on the inside of the little finger of the left 3 times. So your right hand inside the little finger 3 times, as if you're hewing it. Making a square. Setting your heels together and your toes both feet straight at a distance or in any way of a triangle. So that's kind of a foot position. Take hand in hand with the left and right thumbs close. Touch each other's wrists 3 times with the forefinger to each other's pulse. The 5th option is, of course, to whisper to the brother in his ear, "The master and fellows of the worshipful company from whence I came greet you well." Of course, he will then answer, good greet well, the master and fellows of the worshipful company from whence you came. Another one is to take 2 fingers and stroke over your eyelid 3 times. Um, if you have a glass, you are to turn it upside down. Um, ask how you do, and your brothers drink for each other. Ask what lodge they're made a Freemason at. Some of those seem very obvious. Some of those, I think people are just going to wonder you're weird if you just keep constantly looking at every guy and doing that, or taking every glass, every time you drink, taking glass and turning it downward. Um, but those are the options they give you. Now, of course, after covering all this ritual and things, this expose, of course, is written against the fraternity. Gets a little more interesting. And it ends with some letters and some commentary, uh, specifically from a gentleman named Verus Commodus to his friend concerning the Society of Freemasons. And he talks to his friend with all these details and these stories and these ideas. He calls Hiram, the king of Tyre, a heathen, unless he converted, of course, to Judaism after he met Solomon. He pokes fun at the term Mason when he says none of these men who claim to be Masons could lay a brick. He believes that a Freemason, a doctor of the Fifth Order, had learned a hocus pocus word that when it was said, it caused death. And what he's referencing, of course, is a word said that was belonged to Athema and was pronounced against Ananias and Sapphira in the 5th chapter of Acts. He calls Freemasons anti-Christian and Gnostics. He also notes that there is a issue of popularity, the quantity of men versus the quality. He believes that their entrance has become too easy. They're lower class men becoming part of the fraternity. He references wig makers, weavers, drawers, inventors. And these letters, this whole ordeal, very much is in one way or another rooted with the Duke of Wharton. The Duke of Wharton was the Grand Master for a short time. It is an example of the early fraternity caving to noble acts. He was able to slide himself in as a candidate for Grand Mastership, was elected, and then never did anything with fraternity, really. And then when he got replaced, he was very upset about it, and took to making a political scuffle about it as best he could. In the second letter, and he specifically, it should be referenced, he is specifically related to this group that we're now going to talk about, the Gormagons, or if they existed in a formal sense. In this second letter from Verus Commodus, he addresses the most ancient order of the Gormagons. Of course, this comes at a time when London is flush with different societies, secret or otherwise. And this one, of course, pops up in the 1720s. It does not last very long. And it is the venerable order of Gormagons, said to come from China. The Chinese society's names hit its meaning: Gor meaning brother or friend, Mo meaning eminence, and Gos meaning antiquity or length of continuance. And we're told about the Gormagons that it was instituted by Qin Huai Kaipo, the first emperor of China, according to their accounts, and it was many thousands of years older and before Adam. It had a secret, but the letter said it is, as they are informed, of a very extraordinary nature. The qualifications were, of course, extremely strict. The presiding officer was the sub-ecumenical Volk, and you could not become a member if you were already a Freemason unless you underwent the form of degradation. So this is a society that popped up very shortly. It's generally believed that Wharton, the Duke of Wharton, had conceived of it or control of it for a time as his opposition idea to the fraternity, or it was just kind of his own creation and puppet to make fun of them in the sense of it. There's a lot of little political trifles and trifles about this in that time period. So that's our second expose that we've looked at. The next expose we're going to talk about is Masonry Dissected. If you've not read that section yet, let's pause this video, take some time to read it, and come on back. Because it's very important that you do read these, you have understanding of them before we kind of cover the reminding basics before you hit the in-person meeting. All right, Masonry Dissected. This is the big bear in a lot of ways because it caused the most uproar of any of these exposés, and it's pivotal in Masonic history because it set a tone for quite some time. Masonry Dissected is written in 1730. It's said to be authored by Samuel Pritchard, late a member of a constituted lodge, and it causes an uproar in the Grand Lodge of England at the time. And notice I say the Grand Lodge of England, not the United Grand Lodge, not the Grand Lodge of Ancients or anything like that. It is just the Grand Lodge of England at this time that exists. But it causes an uproar because not only does it have a degree in terms of ritual, it has an Inner Apprentice, a Fellow Craft, and a Master Mason degree. It's the first printed description of a Master Mason degree, and it's the most complete expose yet. And its nature, its existence sets off a tone that lasts from 1730 to 1760. It's the most complete text out there. So it begins in its text by tracing the origins of Masonry from early biblical events to York, the city of York, and Masonry in York. It tells us that at the Tower of Babel, the art and mystery of Masonry was first introduced, and then it leads us through 7 stages of historical development, saying that Masonry went from the Tower of Babel, then to Euclid, a worthy and excellent mathematician, then to the Egyptians, Hiram and the builders of King Solomon's Temple. Then it went to Manon Gracchus, an excellent and curious mason who was the chief under Hiram Abiff. Then it moved to Carlos Marcel, who was taught by the Greeks in France before Marcel was elected king. It's generally believed that it's probably Charles Martel if it's referencing anyone specifically in time. From there, it goes to Athelstan or Athelstone of York, who is said to have ordered an assembly to be held once every year at York for this meeting of Masons and the imparting of this knowledge. It does tell us, of course, that the terms of free and accepted Masons, as it now is, has not been heard of till these last few years, and that there was no constituted lodge or quarterly communications held for centuries, really, until 1691, when lords and dukes, lawyers and shopkeepers, and other inferior tradesmen, porters not excepted, were admitted to the fraternity. After giving you this introduction, it begins to take us through the degrees, and it begins, of course, with the Entered Apprentice degree. And there's, of course, a lot of catechism to this. That's the backbone of this expose. But we'll share, as we go through this ritual, a little bit of the catechism, a little of the discussion of things that are pointed out, and symbols and things like that. So the candidate is asked, what you here to do, or the brother is asked even in the opening this. And he says, not to do my own proper will, but to do my passion, subdue my passion still, the rules of Masonry in hand to take, and daily progress therein to make. Compare that to what we say now in our lodges when you're asked, what come you here to do? The signs of a Mason referenced in the Entered Apprentice degree are squares, angles, and perpendiculars. Again, another interesting facet to compare to our own work today. The obligation and the preparation of the candidate bears some similarity to our work. But again, I would encourage you to review it. The penalty of the obligation is directly pointed out, at least for our notes and our own purposes. We're told that the throat is cut, the tongue is taken from the roots of the mouth, the heart is plucked out, buried in the sands of the sea, a length of cable rope from the shore where the tides ebb and flow twice in 24 hours. The body is burned by ashes and scattered over the earth, so no memory of the person remains. Compare that to the obligations you took, and compare that to all 3 obligations. And what you find here, of course, is in our Masonic obligations, in the craft degrees, they can all be traced in one way or another to English penalties for treason at various periods. What's interesting here, of course, is a mix of those penalties, which I leave to your own consideration. We're told that the lodge stands on holy ground, that the furnishings of a lodge are the mosaic pavement, the blazing star, and the indented tarsal. Of course, when we hear the indented tarsal, and it's not specifically alluded at further, we could think that probably to be the tessel, or indented tessel, which is what we often think of, tessellated border, that type of thing. What it is more properly is probably a torsal, the indented torsal, which is a block of wood that is indented into a brick wall for the purpose of providing a resting spot for the end of a supporting joist. So something completely different than what we see it as now, actually. The other furniture of a lodge, of course, is the Bible, the square and compasses. Please note it's singular on compass and not compasses. Missouri ritual, Missouri practice, of course, we say square and compass is. Here in this, it references only the square and compass. The jewels of a lodge are, of course, said to be three movable and immovable. The three movable jewels that they outline is the square to lay down true and right lines, the level to try all horizontals, and the plumb as a rule, or the plumb rule, excuse me, to try all uprights. There are three immovable jewels: the trestle board for the master to draw designs upon, the rough ashlar for the fellow craft to try their jewels upon. So that's their tools, the square, level, plumb, and the broached thurnal, for the entered apprentice to work upon. Now, you may say, Jacob, I've never heard of a broached thurnal. Well, you're looking at one right now on your screen. The broached thurnal is a square with a pyramid top. It is mentioned here by name, but is referenced in the Mason's exception, where the Mason's exception talks about the astler or ashlar, and then it talks about a diamond and square, which is just another way of referencing the broached thurnal. The idea is that the broached thurnal is a object upon which to test your tools and understanding of your working tools and knowledge. In that sense, in early masonry, the broached thurnal was for entered apprentices. The rough ashlar was for fellow crafts, and the perfect ashlar was for master masons. Now, you may also notice, if you're keen, that the movable and immovable jewels bear some great similarity to our own movable and immovable jewels, but they're the opposite of what we use today in terms of reference. This opposition is not old. It only dates to about the 1840s, at least in the United States, where we shifted those things as part of the considerations of the Baltimore Convention, which affected American ritual across the board for all time going forward after the anti-Masonic period. If you have more questions about that, you can always ask during the in-person meeting or shoot me an email and I can walk you through some of those other changes, but that's a big one there. Additionally, we're told in the entered apprentice degree of Masonry Dissected that the keys to the secrets of an entered apprentice are contained in the bone box that neither opens nor shuts, but with ivory keys. We've talked about this idea before, the significance of it. It's this idea of the skull, the bone box, the ivory keys, the teeth, and thus the secrets of masonry concerned and kept within the body. They can only exit through this portal, if you will. Some other concepts there, of course, you can make sense of, but one of the more interesting symbols that they talk about several times over. In the fellow craft degree, within Masonry Dissected, we're asked, why were you made a fellow craft? And we're told, for the sake of the letter G. Now, there is a middle chamber lecture in this, and there are many similarities in detail to modern ritual and its descriptions. We're told that the door to the middle chamber, interestingly enough, is said to be high enough that a cowling cannot reach to stick a pin in or see or hear what occurs inside. So that means, or at least seems to me, to be quite a large door. That's some of our notes on the fellowcraft degree. Now, of course, we come to the Master Mason degree, and this is the first appearance in an expose of this degree. And so we'll kind of walk through some of the key points here that are worth our observation. Of course, in the interesting exchanges, you're asked if you are a Master Mason, and the response, of course, is I am. Try me, prove me, disprove me if you can. Harkening back to a Mason's exam, we hear talk again of the rule of three. You guys remember that? The rule of three, as well as instead of saying Mahabin shall set you free, we now see MB will set you free. There is a beautiful discussion about what was that which was lost and is now found, the Master's word. How was it lost? By 3 great knocks, or the death of our Master Hiram. I think you can make sense of that statement. The death of Hiram Abiff, or the Master Hiram, is some similarity to our modern ritual, but it is important we note the vast differences. Again, keep in mind, the first reference to a Master Mason degree being conferred is 1725. This is the first written expose. How is he slain? He's slain with a setting maul, a setting tool, and a setting beetle. A setting maul, a setting tool, and a setting beetle. This is the only reference to these tools used to kill Hiram Abiff, and they're all referred to as setting items or instruments. The best idea here, of course, we could say is maybe the difference in the shapes of the heads, rounded like a cylinder where you would hit with the ends of the cylinder, rounded like a cylinder where you hit with the sides, or it has a square head. But these are very much the exact same tool. And in fact, if you were looking at Mackey's encyclopedia, it tells you they're all one and the same with just some slight use variants. Hiram, of course, is noticed missing the next day, very much in line with current Hiramic legends. Yet our ritual tells us he was buried, or their ritual in Dissected tells us he was buried for 15 days before the body was found. And he was discovered by 15 loving brethren. When he is found, it's discovered that his grave is covered with green moss and turf. And of course, one of the fellow crafts seeing this says, Muscis domus die grata. Thanks be to God, our master has a mossy house. Of course, they recover the grave. Once they discover his body in it, they mark it with a sprig of cassia, and then so they return to Solomon to report to him the happenings and goings on. We are given some other tools within this degree, including the master's jewels, which include the porch, which is said to be the entrance to the sanctum sanctorum, the dormer, which is the window which lets light within, the square pavement, which represents the ground floor. And we're entrusted in this degree with a master's word, a substitute master's word, mak benak, which that ritual tells us the builder is smitten. That's what it means. We're going to talk a lot about substitute master's words down the road, but for now, mak benak is the one that it references here. Now, just like all these other exposés, they do bring up this fact that you might need to identify yourself to another brother. And it says, if a working mason desires to distinguish that there's an accepted mason nearby, he should take a piece of stone and ask him what it smells of. He should immediately reply that neither brass, iron, nor steel, but of a mason. Then by asking how old he is, he replies above 7, which denotes he's a past master. My brothers, this closes out our second lecture as we discuss Albert Pike's Esoterica in our first section on the ritual exposés. I hope you enjoy your in-person meeting soon as you break into these 3 exposés. We have one more big exposé down the road that we're really going to dig into, and I know you'll enjoy that one as well. But for now, we look forward to the next time, brothers. Remember, Masonic education matters. We're excited to have you here for part of the journey. Have a great rest of the evening, day, wherever you're running as you're listening to this and watching.